Imagine a crime so new, so completely horrific, that the words we had for politics, words like tyranny or despotism, they just suddenly felt useless.
Inadequate.
Totally inadequate. After Nazism and Stalinism, political theorists realized they didn't even have the language to describe what had just happened.
It was a conceptual black hole.
Hmm.
And that shock, that desperate need for a new way to understand it all, is exactly the reason, the exigence behind the book we're diving into today.
And we are really going deep. We want you to enjoy a bold new take on book coverage with this extended analysis. It's more than just a summary, though we definitely include that. This feature looks at how the author actually shapes their argument, how they build influence, and how they earn or sometimes lose your trust.
It's about giving you the tools to read with a sharper eye.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Should you read this book? This should help you decide. It's also, I think, excellent for aspiring writers, or really anyone who wants to see how a masterful argument is built. If you find this format valuable, please let us know. Your feedback really does guide what we do next.
And for our analysis today, you're listening to a unique two-host AI conversation, which is powered by Google's Notebook LM. It allows for a deeper, more dynamic look at Hannah Arendt's monumental work, The Origins of Totalitarianism.
And it is a monumental work. It's historically dense, it's philosophically driven, and its central claim was, well, revolutionary.
The claim being that totalitarianism isn't just a really, really bad dictatorship. It's a structurally distinct form of government that grew out of specific modern conditions. It was something new.
Something entirely new. And the power of that claim rests so heavily on Arendt herself, doesn't it? When you pick up a book this big, this controversial, the first question is always, why should I trust her?
Right. Which brings us to her ethos, her credibility. It's foundational to the whole project.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Arendt was a Jewish political theorist. She actually had to flee Nazi Germany in the 1930s.
And that background immediately gives her this enormous weight, a moral seriousness that, frankly, very few writers at the time could match.
She combined this really high-level philosophical training, that intellectual rigor, with the direct, terrifying experience of persecution.
She was, in a way, one of the very uprooted people she writes about.
Yeah.
And that combination is just essential. She's not just judging these events morally. She's judging them structurally, intellectually. She refuses to just say, oh, it was human wickedness.
Which would be the easy way out.
The easy way out. Her personal history makes us trust her analytical judgments about ideology and terror in a way we might not with a purely academic observer.
And the timing of the book is just everything. That exigence you mentioned, the reason she had to write it was so immediate.
It was published in 1951. I mean, she's responding directly to the shockwaves of World War II. The world was just reeling, demanding to know how these regimes became possible in so-called civilized nations.
And traditional political science had no good answers.
None. The old concepts just didn't work. So Arendt's purpose was radical. She set out to provide an entirely new framework. Her audience was, educated readers, scholars, policymakers, and her goal was to warn them about the specific preconditions that lead to this new horror.
So let's get into that framework. Before we analyze how she makes the argument, let's just quickly summarize what the argument is. What, in simple terms, makes totalitarianism so new, according to Arendt?
She defines it as a form of rule that aims for total control over human beings from within. That's the crucial philosophical point.
From within, what does that mean exactly?
Well, older tyrannies, dictatorships, they control your external behavior. They stop you from saying things or doing things.
Right.
Totalitarianism, she argues, seeks to completely eradicate human spontaneity and ultimately your freedom of thought itself.
Eradication of spontaneity? That sounds a little abstract. How would that look in practice?
It means the total elimination of a private life. It means constant, forced conformity to a rigid ideology. It's the inability to do anything genuinely new or unpredictable. The goal is to make every single action, every thought, completely predictable and subservient to the ideological machine.
So if you can't act spontaneously, you're no longer a free political person in her view.
You're not. And that is a terrifying thought. Her entire case is built around three preconditions she believes led to that point.
And this is the book's famous tripartite structure.
Exactly. Section number 1 is antisemitism, followed by number 2, imperialism, and finally number 3, totalitarianism.
But she's not saying that anti-Semitism is totalitarianism or that imperialism is totalitarianism. That connection is vital.
Oh, absolutely. The structure is the thesis. These are not isolated things. They are cumulative, interlocking preconditions. Anti-Semitic ideology gave a blueprint for scapegoating. Imperialism provided the administrative techniques for racial domination.
The bureaucracy of dehumanization.
The bureaucracy of dehumanization, yes. Combine that with the masses of uprooted stateless people that resulted from it all, and these elements crystallize into the final form of total domination.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. The analysis of her rhetorical strategy, her logos, her logical appeal. Because Arendt isn't just telling history. She's building this massive philosophical case, and her logic just dominates the entire book.
It does. Her method is this powerful, if complex, blend of what you could call chronology plus conceptual layering.
Chronology plus conceptual layering.
Yeah. She moves chronologically through the 19th century, the rise of modern antisemitism, the scramble for Africa, and then into the 20th century regimes. But she's constantly interrupting that timeline.
Why? What does that interruption do?
It's strategic. It's her conceptual analysis. It lets her show that while these events were happening, they were also revealing these deep structural patterns. She's basically saying, look at the history, yes, but more importantly, look at the logic that it established.
The underlying logic.
Precisely. She ties together all this seemingly disparate evidence. I mean, think about it. She connects the political chaos of the Dreyfus Affair in France to the brutal racial administration in colonial Africa, to the rise of mass propaganda, and finally, to the concentration camps.
And for her, they are all part of the same logical chain.
They all support her massive claim that totalitarianism is a structurally new way of governing.
And her analysis of the concentration camps, that's where the argument just hits with this devastating intellectual force. She doesn't see them as just a byproduct of cruelty.
No, not at all. For her, they are the central institution of totalitarian power. They are laboratories.
Laboratories.
Laboratories designed specifically to test how far human individuality and unpredictability could be destroyed. It's systematic, cold, bureaucratic terror. Its goal is to create what she called superfluous humanity.
That focus on administrative technique, on the cold logic of terror, that brings us right to her key rhetorical strategy, redefinition and contrast.
Yes. She forces you to abandon all your familiar political categories to understand just how unique this was.
How does she do that?
She constantly contrasts totalitarianism with older concepts like tyranny. For instance, she'll point out that a traditional tyrant targets specific political enemies.
Right, the people who oppose him.
Totalitarianism targets entire populations, whole races or classes, and their very capacity for free thought. By redefining the terms, she forces you to confront the terrifying specificity of Nazi and Stalinist terror.
This focus on cold, systematic analysis also really dictates her tone, which is remarkable. It's so coolly analytical, often severe, disenchanted.
You won't find any overt emotional manipulation. There's no purple prose about suffering.
And yet that coldness creates this incredibly profound, almost disturbing pathos. The emotional weight comes from her clinical description of systems designed to destroy reality itself. It makes the horror intellectual, which somehow makes it more chilling.
It does. It's a horror that stays with you.
We should take a second here. If you're finding this kind of detailed breakdown valuable, remember that Mindful Moments, our YouTube channel, offers AI book analysis, summaries, and critiques. It's all about inspiring reflection and rational thought.
We really believe that understanding how an argument is made is just as important as knowing what the argument is.
Absolutely. And continuing with Arndt's toolbox, she uses juxtaposition and irony so brilliantly. She'll contrast these huge ideals of the modern era, like the philosophical rights of man,
With the brutal, devastating reality of stateless people and the camp system.
I think this is where she really lands her sharpest critique of liberalism. By showing that modern liberal societies produce these rightless masses, people with no nationality, no citizenship, and therefore no political rights, she exposes this huge irony.
It's a central pillar of her argument. The traditional political structures, the nation-state, they had fundamentally failed. The so-called rights of man turned out to mean nothing if you weren't a citizen of a specific country.
And that hypocrisy she exposes just deepens her persuasive power.
It shows a failure within the very systems that were supposed to prevent this kind of evil.
So after all this, we have to ask, as a rhetorical project, did she succeed? Did she give us that new framework she set out to create?
Oh, I think absolutely. The book is incredibly effective at persuading you that totalitarianism came from these specific, interlocking historical elements, anti-Semitism, imperialism, mass atomization. It wasn't just, some timeless evil making a comeback.
It gives us a framework for recognizing the warning signs.
A powerful and enduring one, yes.
And hold on, the criticisms are there. People say the book is too dense, that it's very Eurocentric, and maybe that she doesn't pay enough attention to economic factors.
And that's a fair challenge. It is dense. She definitely privileges political explanations over economic ones.
So do those limitations weaken the book's authority?
I would say no. In fact, those very features, the intellectual rigor, the insistence on conceptual clarity, the intense focus on political failure, that's what gives the book its lasting rhetorical force. She forces us to confront the fact that the primary danger is the collapse of political responsibility.
So her work remains essential because it teaches us how to look beneath the surface of politics, to recognize that danger.
Even when it's wrapped in the cold language of bureaucracy or the comforting simplicity of a mass movement.
Which leads to a final, pretty provocative thought for you to consider long after this is over.
Arendt put immense stress on the psychological preconditions of these movements, specifically the loneliness and isolation of individuals in modern society. So if totalitarianism relies on destroying a shared sense of reality, how much are we today, in our increasingly isolated digital world, inadvertently preparing the psychological ground for new forms of total control?
That is a critical question for all of us. If you want the full breakdown of Arendt's complex argument, click the link on screen for the in-depth book summary. Subscribe, share, purchase via the link, and think rationally.
See the many genre-based book podcasts at Mindful Moments. Subscribe and nourish your mind on the go.